Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the VC perspective on IP and patents. So, with me today, I have Arne Tonning from Alliance VC, and I would say when you check in Arne's resume, it's basically so long that you have to use AI to make a summary of it. Essentially, Arne has been in VC longer than quite a few founders have been alive. So there's a lot of experience brought to the table here. You started out as an engineer, Arne, from Georgia Tech, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And how come you went into venture capital?
Oh, long journey. At some point through my career, I found out that that's where I thought the most interesting action and my fit would be. But it was a journey to get there. And quite frankly, I started out as a research scientist right after school, and then found my way into VC. So I've done various things along the way.
Yep. But today you're the partner of Alliance VC, and you've invested in some really exciting companies. One of my favorites, of course, is 1X. But you also have some other deep tech investments, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, as a venture capitalist, all your investments are beautiful, just like your babies. But of course, there are companies at various stages and various speeds, and 1X is probably the one that everybody loves just at the moment. In reality, I've invested in tens of companies, and that's everything from like true deep tech companies doing really novel things, all the way through to sort of more speed execution market oriented companies. So seen the full breadth of it.
Yep. And we're here today to talk about the VC perspective on patent. It's a perspective that a lot of founders only kind of experience secondhand. So we're here today to get some insight into the how VCs think about patents. So let's get started.
Yep.
So when you look at a company, you have been excited by their team and their business plan, and then you're going into due diligence. Can you tell me a little bit about what is the actual process of doing the due diligence on the IP side?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say, it differs from company to company, and I think it's worthwhile sort of zooming out to think about what is the IP. And in reality, we invest in tech companies, which means that for all of them, IP in some shape or form is a strategic asset for the company. And there are sort of some layers to it. One is that you need to make sure that you are actually allowed to do what you do. And an important part of that is a freedom to operate perspective. So, that might be part of what you do. Sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not obvious. So that's one part of it. The other is what types of IP does the company have? And you sort of through DD look into that, and trademarks, copyrights, patents, trade secrets, data, domain names. All of these are some, at least, there are legal definitions of what kind of IP they are. But to us lay people with a commercial mind, all of these are IP and have different views on the importance of them. And I think it's also important to talk to companies about, okay, IP in the broad sense. Why is it important? And there's either implicitly or explicitly some sort of IP strategy and associated with that protection. And the most important is to be very intentful about what you do around IP and understand that. And the level of protection depends on the company, type of company, the type of product, and the context. And where that, for the types of companies where that's very important, then you will deep dive into these to understand them and make sure that, protections and freedoms are appropriate.
Yep. So if we're looking at you going into the diligence process, and if we think about patents specifically, are there some red flags that that you kind of, if you find them in a company, you strongly hesitate to invest in them?
I think this typically should come up before the due diligence, to be honest, right? But if it is a company that sort of where the patents are, key element for competitiveness of the company, it's important that the process have been run appropriately and that the right protections are in place or are in process of being in place, right? And so, do you infringe on others? Do you not have freedom to operate? And secondarily, if it's the patents are core, are they disputed? Is the process run according to how it should be? So you actually will end up with the right protections if they're not already in place, and you cover the right places, and these sorts of things are elements of what you look into.
Yep. So let's assume that we now have a company where basically technology and patenting is core. You might have some hardware product or something that is life science, etc.
Exactly.
When you look at the portfolio, then is it a decision factor, or is it more like a nice to have?
No, it's definitely a decision factor. I think if you look at patents specifically, they're either super important, they're never nice to have, because if they're not important, why are you doing them? So I would say that they're either very important or they shouldn't be there at all, or maybe it's a historical something, but generally we view them for the right companies always as super important, and therefore they should be have due attention both from the company side and from the investor side in the process and in due diligence, and after that, which is the important part, is also managing the life cycle of the company, and the life cycles of the patent portfolios follow that life cycle.
Yep. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next question we have. So this is more from the founder's perspective. So one of the things that quite often come up when specifically comes to IP protection and patents specifically is that how do the founders balance speed and protection? So can you comment a little bit about some founders may think that this is slowing down our process. We should not be doing this, or let's skip it for now until we get later in the process.
Yeah, so I don't think it's truly a balance, because it's yes to both.
Okay.
Because VCs love speed and founders should love speed, right? So speed is super important. So you cannot really compromise on speed, but that doesn't mean that you really, for the companies where this is important, you can't also. That means that you can't counter by being loose on the protection side to gain speed. So you really have to, focus on both. So the way that you need to do that is that you essentially need to run your processes fast and good in parallel with having speed in the company. So how do you go about that? Well, you need to find ways of doing the process quicker, which is why we believe in Lightbringer, invested in Lightbringer, because we think tools like that increases the speed of the process and the quality of the process, right? So you can just align the speed of the process with the speed of building the company. So I think that's an important part of it. And the other is how you do it, right? So, one thing I should say, obviously, is that I'm not, a legal professional or an IP professional. I have a, commercial VC's view on patents and IP protection. So you shouldn't take the actual advice on the details from me, but from people who know what they're doing. In the sense of speed and filing, so it's important that you get to a filing point quickly, and then that allows you to iterate appropriately from that point, right? So you don't need to be like ultra perfect at the filing time, which can also speed up your process. Obviously, you need to have quality to that point as well, but you can maybe file slightly broad and then, zoom in on the claims that will actually stick, or you can iterate on it from there. So I think both in terms of running the process with the right partners and tools can improve your speed to align with the speed of building the company, and also being thoughtful about what you file at what point in time to align with the speed. I think are like two dimensions to think about that.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. One of the things that a lot of kind of founders forget is that they likely have competition, and there are others out there trying to do the same thing. So if you don't run at high speed, VCs won't be interested in you, and you will likely lose to someone who's running faster. So when it comes to running fast, one of the problems that a lot of deep tech founders face is that they basically have to start pitching to VCs before everything is fully protected. I'm sure that you encounter this, that founders are hesitant to disclose information to you because they have not have everything fully protected yet. How do you typically talk to founders in that way, and what do you recommend them to do?
Yeah, so I think like there are like three things. One is what we talked about before, like speed to filing. I think helps avoid the problem. So that's like the fundamental cure for it. The other is not disclosing the wrong things in the process. So talking about what you look to achieve, but not necessarily how you look to achieve it, and therefore like getting into disclosing the wrong things relative to the claims that you will ultimately be file if you communicate before filing. And I think those are the two most important things. There are also like NDAs, but the NDA domain is also very tricky because VCs don't like to sign NDAs early, and secondarily, NDAs aren't really all that good protections in the end. So I think like I'm not disregarding that NDAs have a role to play in this thing, but don't overestimate how good NDAs are or how easy they are to get signed. So I would actually say that the first two ones are the more important ones, like getting to filing fast, and secondarily being thoughtful about the communication so you don't dilute your opportunity to file by focusing on the how. And you probably need to get some advice on how to do that. But I think also good VCs are somewhat thoughtful about this, so it can be managed.
Yeah, I agree, and I really like your point about you don't have to exactly tell people how you're doing it. If you give them a great problem statement, and so they clearly understand what problem you're trying to solve, and then you can on a high level describe how you're doing things. But if that high level needs to be protected, then you really need to do it before you start speaking to 50 different VCs about your amazing technology.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that the only true protection is to get to filing, right?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that like you can't talk to people on very general level and talking about effects of what you aim to do without explaining how you do it. And
Exactly. And as we'll come to later, you still evaluate the team and the vision and the business a lot. And as mentioned before, the patents is more of a checkbox that needs to be in place, and that can't be a red flag for the investment. So let's move on to the next one. So the thing that comes up again and again, and I think you've said it 5 times already, is the freedom to operate, basically the business risk. So tell us a little bit about how VCs think about freedom to operate when they looking to invest in a company.
Yeah, I think it depends once again on the type of company, but it also depends a bit on the stage, right? So for small and early stage investors, you're maybe ready to take more risk on this, and at the later stage in a bigger investment, it becomes more of formal and also a formal issue in the process, right? So I would say that, like, we invest most of our investments in seed stage companies, and doing like formal with attorney freedom to operate analysis is not the normal, but it does happen. Most of the time, it's kind of like a more start from the big picture and zoom in process. Okay, so what are you actually doing? Is it obvious that this is like an open domain, or there's precedence for it being an open domain, or is it more specific? And then you need to, typically the ones where there are most patents involved is also the area where you like need to understand what does it cover and what else is out there, and zoom in to get like a reasonable risk-adjusted view on is this reasonable to think that it's open to navigate.
Yeah, and that's actually, I think it's a very good point. Doing that full-fledged down to the nuts and bolts, the FTO. I've done that a couple of times, and as you say, when you go to Series B, Series C, they will be very, very diligent, and you will spend many hours in FTO discussions. But that's actually the reason why we created this FTO Lite product that we have now. That's really suitable for companies going into seed stage, and they still need to have some kind of idea of what their landscape looks like, and kind of be aware what the VCs are looking for at that stage.
Exactly, so I think that sort of lightweight approach to sort of mapping out what the area looks like is the appropriate at the early stages. And I think all of these processes get heavier the later stage the company is. That's a general learning. And then when you get hopefully to a good exit situation, unless that's an IPO, which is the exception, not the rule, I can assure you that this is extremely painful at exit if it hasn't been handled sort of in the right life cycle approach to it, where it sort of gets more and more serious the better the company gets. At exit, if the ducks are not in a row, then it gets super painful.
Yeah, and I think you're actually right about that. The earlier you kind of put this base plate in place, that the foundation you can build upon, the less problems you will have later on. But I think that's true for almost everything in a startup. If you don't have your ducks in order for the different things, the further you go in the company building, the more painful it will be to solve it.
Yeah, I think this sort of the thoughtfulness, the strategy aspect, the intentfulness of it is like super important, right? So as long as you like know where you're going and thinking about it, right, and like build a direction for it, and then you're aware that what you're doing is lightweight, but at least we're doing the right things, and then you build upon it as you go, and it gets to be more. I mean, I'm not saying that patent claims don't need to be detailed from day one when you're filing a patent, but I'm saying your overall approach to it and sort of how heavy duty you go on all the processes tend to increase as time goes by, and it becomes a more serious company.
Exactly, and your patent portfolio will look very, very different between Series Seed, Series A, and Series B. It's a completely different animal. So let's move on to the next. Talking a little bit about the future trends, but I want to start out with the second question here. Now that AI is in play, and we see that copying someone else is becoming easier and easier, has that changed the way you think about IP in general and patents in specifically?
Yeah, so I would say like AI in a way is in that software data domain that typically I'm not saying, I mean, it's one where there's like a multitude of IP strategies, right? And also some patenting software and so forth is not entirely straightforward. So it has tended to be a domain where it's less intensive from a patent perspective than some other domains. So I think like we go back to something that I didn't mention, but kind of like the difference between the patent domain in my head and the trade secret domain is kind of like how easy is it to observe what's being done, and how easy is it to reverse engineer? And if it's sort of easy to observe and it's easy to reverse engineer, then you're kind of in the patent domain. And if it's hard to observe and it's hard to reverse engineer, then you're maybe in the trade secret domain. So I think the software data domain has been sort of more maybe in the trade secret domain and less in the patent domain. I think that said, I think AI has some very specific new features about it. Is that there are increased dynamics, it's faster to build, it's faster to grow, and a shorter product life cycles. And in general, it's sort of moats are coming down with AI, I think is like the key thing. And that means like to build a sustainable long-term business, like finding moats is like critical. And I think some of the old moats are becoming more important again, like unique data or network effects. But in that context, I would also say that patents is another way of building moats, and therefore I think it's also on the trend towards becoming more important because there are less of other moats to have. So I think that's the general. I would say that's the trend, but it's a very sort of difficult area to say something very specific about trends. I also noticed that OpenAI, for example, started as an open source kind of thing and have not historically been a patent intensive company, but it has increased over the last couple of years. So we see some of those players going that way. I mean, it's still a company with not a patent portfolio like IBM or something that's been working on it for a million years and starting with computers themselves. But I think that's the direction in AI, even if it's sort of an area that's kind of a bit difficult to navigate in that it's complex and multitude of strategies.
Yeah, and then we of course have like the edge AI when you're actually running AI on physical devices like drones and robotics, etc. And just as you mentioned, the patents is one of the few moats that is available to a small company. Like large companies have network effects, economies of scale, etc. And this is one way of getting it in early. Have you observed something in the? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So also like application of AI is patentable, right? And that includes when you combine like the algorithms with some device or something like that, just like you say, right?
Yeah. Yes. So have you observed in the other new hot areas like quantum, fintech, climate tech, have you seen any shift there as well, as where like when it becomes easier to copy a fintech product, are people more likely to patent around it?
I'd like to see, I've seen less of it in fintech, but I might be wrong. I think the quantum and the climate are very patent intensive areas. I think there are very sort of in quantum there are like lots of fundamental innovations on like the hardware itself, and also sort of fundamental approaches in the algorithmic space. There are sort of all of them are sort of new novel scientific approaches to things, and then they tend to be IP intensive. And likewise in the climate tech space, a lot of it, climate tech is obviously also a broad category, but a number of them deal with physical devices, and physical devices tend to be easier to observe. If we go back to the theory of can it be observed and can it be reverse engineered. And so I also view that as a pretty patent-intensive area.
So actually an interesting fact that came out just yesterday, so I'll spring this on you now, Arne, is that in quantum, almost a third of the world's companies are from the EU, but only 6% of the patents. And this is mainly because US companies are so much better at patenting. Do you have any insights into why the US thinks patents is more important than Europe?
I'm actually quite surprised by those numbers. I know that there are certain countries in Europe, I was about to say EU, but I would count Norway as part of this, where I'm from. And Norway has a terrible track record for the volume of patents, to be honest. So I think there are like local differences, but I was actually surprised by the number between, if you look at the difference between the US and the EU in this context.
I think it's something that Europe, and I am including Norway and also UK, that is no longer in the EU, to this. It seems like there is a mindset difference between American companies and European companies when it comes to patenting. So it would be interesting to look at that more going forward. So let's jump on to our last subject of today, which is some actual real stories. So I'd like to hear from you. Do you have any stories where either the patent side of things made or broke a deal for you?
Yeah. So I think I'm better off talking about making a deal, because I think we try to talk about the right things at the right times with the right companies, so that it's kind of like the wrong deals are hopefully more sort of siphoned off along the process, rather than getting to a boiling point at the last point and then breaking, because then it means you also run a bad process, right? So we have seen freedom to operate issues pop up that have caused us not to pursue something, I think I'd say. In terms of making, I think in the portfolio we have companies where it's sort of very market driven and execution oriented, but we also have companies that are heavy on IP and where that's absolutely core. So I think I checked the portfolio. We have a company called Touchnetics, which do touch sensors for touch screens and other user interfaces. They have a patent family, 35 patent families now. So that's, I think, the largest portfolio of patents in our portfolio of companies. And clearly, that's absolutely core to what they do. Otherwise, it's the DNA of the company, right? So I think that's like on the other end of the scale, where that's like absolutely central to the company. Right?
Yeah, interesting what you said, that you basically siphon off companies where you identify risks early on. How early in the process would you say that you kind of filter out deals that do not seem to have the IP in order?
Ideally in the first meeting, but that's probably bragging to say that we systematically do that. But that's what we do is that we talk as a team probably to more than 1,000 companies a year. And that means that you can't spend a lot of time on each company, and finding the disqualifiers is actually the way to be able to spend more time on the things you really should be spending more time on. So getting down the road and getting to a late DD thing and then figuring out that there's a deal breaker is actually bad process and detrimental to well, it's terrible for the company that's going to be exposed to it, but it also means that I or my colleague or whatever have spent a lot of wrong time, essentially.
Do you like to see it in the pitch deck even, that they have their IP in order?
I think proving that you have it in order in the pitch deck is probably too big for a pitch deck, so fundamentally, but I think showing thoughtfulness around IP in the pitch deck goes a long way to qualifying that you actually know what you're doing. Saying, we have this and this is how we think about it.
Yep. So early on, as soon as possible, preferably in the first meeting, you can kind of disqualify. And it is interesting what you just said, that you're basically trying to filter people out as soon as possible, since you're talking to so many prospects. So you need to kind of identify all the red flags immediately.
Of course, in the service of ultimately spending a lot of time with the right ones.
Exactly.
The
No.
objective is to succeed with the right companies, not to fail a lot of companies.
Yep. But I'm trying to get it from the founder perspective here. You really want to be in and not out. And to be in, you have to have all the boxes ticked for the VC to spend actually quality time with you and trying to understand exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, the objective is to spend as much time and ultimately invest in the right companies. But the flip side of that is spending as little time on the wrong companies as possible. And that means filtering, asking the right questions early so you can filter very effectively.
Awesome. So we have a final segment, Arne, where I will give you some short statements, and I want your reaction to them. And one thing that I encounter a lot is that founders say that VCs just don't care about patents. What's your view on
that? So VCs care a lot about patents for the companies where that is very important. And there's no question about that. Then, it comes to the category of companies again, and I think there's also has been a pendulum, right, where it's more or less according to time, but I think for the right companies it's always important. And I think also you have some great statistic that you shared with me at one point, where the average valuation of patent holding companies or patent intensive companies versus the ones that were not. And I think that's a fantastic metric, and maybe you know it better than me, to be honest.
Yeah, that was a study by Harvard and PitchBook, where they basically see valuation is almost double. And that's just statistics. They didn't go into details into every company, just looking at like 35,000 companies, something like that. And also,
I can also bring another proof point, right? So Alliance invested in Lightbringer. We're a VC. Lightbringer deals with patents. If we're an example, then VCs care about patents. Otherwise, we wouldn't make that investment. So I think that's a circular proof point, but it's a very good one.
Yep. Yeah, very good point, Arne. So the next thing actually comes from the other end, where when I talk to a lot of researchers, they say, well, I have a patent now, so the VCs will give me money.
Obviously false. Also, I've had companies where they've had like a patent attorney do a valuation exercise, and they come and say, look, this patent attorney, I have no revenue, by the way, and I also don't have a product, but the patent lawyer told me that, or the patent consultant, I would call more than a lawyer, said the valuation of your patent portfolio is 100 million NOK or SEK or whatever. And VCs don't look at those numbers at all, just to be completely clear. We look at the total potential of the company, the team that's going to execute, the plan, the milestones, and the patents or the IP at large. And it's about conviction about the whole package, not about an individual component.
Yeah, and this is something that I think a lot of early stage founders they're underestimating how important their market size is and how much of that market size they can actually take with their solution.
Yeah.
So you need to have a granted patent before you raise. So basically you need to have already proven that you have protection.
Obviously false. It also goes to it's the whole package and conviction thing that we just talked about, but it also goes back to our filing point, right? You just need to run good processes, and the right things should be filed at the right time. Of course, there's risk with filing and not having granted patents, but there's massive risk in all the companies that we deal with. So that's not the dominant risk.
Yep. And then I think you've commented on this before, but I will take it again. The very, very often stated patents only slow you down.
I mean, it takes time to do patents properly, but it's also super important, and it's more about structuring your process so it's equally fast to your company building.
Yeah, exactly. As you said before, you cannot actually compromise on either. You just have to do both, even though it seems impossible at times as a founder. So anyone who would invent the 48-hour day for founders would be an excellent person.
And if you do patent it.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely patent the 48-hour day for founders. You can't patent AI.
I think you can ask, what is AI? There are lots of things in AI that can be patented, and there are probably lots of things in AI that cannot be patented or are prior art or whatnot. So this is a complex area, right? So I put it in the sort of the software and algorithmic bucket, but there are so many components to it, and I think it's back to understanding what you do and having the, a plan and a strategy and thoughtful about it. And if you have the right things, you should definitely patent.
Yeah, and I completely agree. It's completely different if you're building an AI-driven marketplace or if you're building an AI-driven drone system. So it's not the same. AI is being basically stamped on everything right now, and you really need to think about, as you actually mentioned, if someone can look at the product and see how you're doing it, then you probably should be protecting it.
Yeah, and what we today call an AI company is probably what in 10 years we call a company, because all companies will
exactly.
have AI.
Yeah, companies that don't have AI is probably called something else at that time, like dead companies probably. So finally,
it's called a bankruptcy.
It's called a bankruptcy. Yes, let's call them a bankruptcy. So finally, if you see a very strong patent portfolio, is that the de-risk to the investment or just a hygiene factor?
No, so it's not a hygiene factor. I think most of all, it's a strategic asset to build a company, and then in some cases you even account that there's some fallback option with some value. But I think most VCs are focused on building great companies, and I think it's mostly seen as an important strategic value for building a great company.
Awesome. Well, that's it for today. I'm not sure if we've got any questions in from the audience. Everything seems super clear here, so apparently we have no questions. So Arne, just thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to meeting up in Oslo next week. Next week is Oslo Innovation Week. If you haven't seen that one, make sure that you check it out. And if you're there, find both me and Arne.
Yeah, I think deep tech companies in Oslo should talk to Ola.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you for today. Have a great day, everyone. And in our next webinar, we're actually going to be talking about how large companies see patents and how they are valued by large companies that you want to do business with.